All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And good evening, one and all, and welcome back to the X Zone. My name is Rob McConnell, and for the next hour, I'm going to be your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone is coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, www.classic1220.ca. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is a gentleman I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years. His name is Bart Sibrel. Bart, you may have heard of Bart. You may have seen his videos. This is the gentleman who wrote and produced a very, very interesting video called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. Maybe you will get into that a little later on. But the main topic of tonight's show is Bart's latest book entitled Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker on the CIA hit list. Joining me now is Bart Sibrel. And Bart, welcome back to the X Zone. Always great talking to you, my friend.
Oh, well, thank you, Rob. How's it going up in Canada?
Well, it's kind of getting cold up here, my friend. And yesterday we had that event at the Rainbow Bridge, where there was an explosion on the U.S. side. A car hit a barrier and it blew up. And they shut down all the bridges from Canada to the United States throughout Niagara, which would have been the Lewiston Bridge, the Rainbow Bridge, the Peace Bridge, and the bridge from Fort Erie over to Buffalo. So it was quite an event, but everything was settled. Everything was investigated. No signs of terrorism, and the bridges are back open today. So things are pretty good here.
You know, as I'm listening to you describe that, I remember that event that just happened was on the national news on every network in the United States. And what happened a few years ago when the entire Canadian-U.S. border was closed down for a week because people were protesting the dictatorship of governments that called themselves democracy. Do you realize that was not reported a single time for an entire week on any major news network in the United States?
Yeah.
But one car exploding on the border was. You would think the United States Canadian border being blocked by protesters would be national news, number one story for a week. They didn't even mention it. They mentioned the president got a new cat. So, Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, but you know how the media is, Bart. For the listeners who may not have had the pleasure of listening to you on the X Zone before, tell them a little bit about who Bart Sibrel is.
Well, I am a filmmaker. I started out actually as an actor, and then when I realized that I was treating a total stranger's words like gospel, I thought, well, I could write a play. So I started writing plays. I started making those into short films. Someone who had a hotel saw one and said, hey, we need someone to do our TV commercial. And that was when I started my video production company, producing TV commercials, documentaries, music videos, and the like. And I kind of stumbled upon what I'm known for, my most famous or infamous film, which you can see for free on the homepage at Sibrel.com. It's just S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, R-E-L, Sibrel.com. It's a film about the unfortunate truth that, yes, indeed, the moon landings were falsified by the corrupt federal government. And when I listened to your intro, Rob, about how fact is fiction, well, that's the case of this. The alleged fact is they went to the moon, but that's a fiction. And the fiction that it was done, on Earth in a studio, that actually is true. And we have so much incontrovertible proof that the moon missions were fake. And I originally turned down the project because so much of it seemed plausible that maybe they really did fake it. Keep in mind, my job as a filmmaker is to make fake scenes look real. And I noticed that those scenes that they claim were in natural sunlight on the moon were absolutely shot with electrical light, which means they're on Earth. And that kind of planted a seed in my mind, that's kind of strange. And then you realize that today, with 50 years better technology than in 1969, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into outer space is only 1,000th the distance to the moon. So what they're really claiming is 50 years ago, ahead of schedule, on the first attempt, when all of NASA combined had 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone, they sent astronauts 1,000 times farther than they can send them today with 50 years better technology. So what they're really saying is, for the first time in history, technology was greater in the past than in the future. But that's a historic and scientific impossibility. And if it weren't for people's emotional attachment to the glorious event, they would see the truth. In fact, I did Glenn Beck's radio show not too long ago, and he's an alleged anti-corruption, anti-deep state person. But his thought is, well, I know how bad America is, but at least we went to the moon. And then he has on an astronaut and kisses his feet for an entire hour, not realizing that that guy is an accomplice to several homicides that I know of for covering up people who were going to expose the moon landing. And so this is horrendous. This is the state of the world. This is the state of our government. And it's outrageous that they are that arrogant.
Bart, do you think with the technology they have today, as well as what they've learned about the Van Allen belt and the radiation that has been affecting astronauts, even in the shuttle missions, that they will and can go back to the moon? Or I shouldn't say back to the moon, can go to the moon this time?
No, they can't. I mean, for example, in 1945, they exploded the first atomic bomb in the history of the world. Just 10 years later, atomic bombs were 1,000 times more powerful. So if we could go to the moon on the first attempt with 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases all over the moon. There are bases at the South Pole right now, which, by the way, took 6 attempts to reach here on Earth, and somehow they did it on the first attempt ahead of schedule. And it has 100-mile-per-hour winds, 100 degrees below zero. But there are bases there because it's humanly possible. If it were humanly possible to go to the moon, there'd be bases there. We'd have been on Mars a long time ago. In fact, the latest alleged moon mission, they sent an unmanned probe with mannequins to orbit the moon. Okay, so 54 years ago, we can play golf and drive cars on the moon. And with 54 years better technology, we can't even send humans to orbit the moon. We have to use mannequins. And the reason is, you alluded to it, space radiation that they would have to travel through. And my book, which is on audio, I read it myself, Kindle or print, at Sibrel.com. It's an interactive book. There are 16 video clips at Sibrel.com that you can watch for free now. I basically write a chapter and say, look, if you want to understand the next chapter, go watch video link 1, video link 2. And one of the clips is just mind-blowing. We have a NASA employee saying that the technology necessary for an astronaut to go to the moon and back and survive the radiation has yet to be invented. He's saying it on camera. I mean, so if the technology to go to the moon and back has yet to be invented, then how did they do it in 1969? It just boggles the mind. And then when I try to talk to the guy as a journalist, they refuse to let him talk to anybody. And they sent Geiger counters up into the radiation field. And I said, give me those readings. They say it's a secret. And I'm like, why would the temperature of the sun or the amount of helium in Jupiter's atmosphere or the amount of radiation surrounding the Earth be a secret, because if they released the data, it would prove that the Apollo astronauts would have been killed going to the moon with the technology they had, because they still, to this day, cannot go to the moon.
Well, weren't the Russians on the moon first with a robotic mission?
They crashed a probe to the moon first, and then they also landed a probe on the moon about 6 months before the Apollo 11 mission. But they never sent humans to the moon. In fact, the most industrialized country on Earth, which is China, says to go from today to the technology necessary for a man to walk on the moon is going to take 20 years. So how could we, with 5 decades older technology, develop the technology in 8.5 years? You see? And so we point out that I found classified footage of the crew of Apollo 11 faking part of the photography right in front of your eyes, dated 2 days into the flight, with a third track of audio telling them how to do it from the CIA. The NBC News was going to break this story nationwide. I worked for NBC News. And they said this proves conclusively that we didn't go to the moon. This classified footage I uncovered. I said, I know, it's unbelievable. And then they get a call from the federal government threatening them. They back down and don't broadcast it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Bart, why would the CIA be involved in this false flag moon mission?
Well, I guess that's their forte, I suppose. And so first of all, we have the logic. You can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. Secondly, we have them faking part of the mission right in front of your eyes. Thirdly, we have, just go to Sibrel.com, watch the 3-minute video. I mean, you can prove the moon landings are fake with one photograph that they claim is on the moon, where objects 5 feet apart from one another, the shadows diverge at 90 degrees. When if it were taken in sunlight, they'd be parallel and never intersect. I mean, you can prove it right there. And then, believe it or not, there was a gentleman by the name of Cyrus Eugene Akers. And as he was dying in 2004, he confessed for fear of God that he was a murderer. He worked at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. The military police came in. They said, who did you kill? He said, a coworker. Why did you kill him? Because the coworker and I eyewitnessed the filming of Apollo 11, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1968 at Cannon Air Force Base. And he was going to tell the world because he thought it was morally wrong, and I killed him to keep it a secret. We have that testimony. So we have 4 incontrovertible proofs that the moon missions were fake, and people just don't want to believe it. They're like Glenn Beck. It's like, I know America is so corrupt and so fallen, but at least we went to the moon. And it's so easy to fake. There's no independent press coverage. And Eugene Krantz, who was flight director, said all those guys in command center can tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and an actual flight. And just because there were hundreds of thousands of people involved doesn't mean they were in on the secret. I mean, that's like saying Bank of America has 400,000 tellers. So do the bank tellers and the CEO know the same about the corruption in the bank? No, completely different.
Hey, Bart, stand by, my friend. We've got to take our first break. Exonation. Bart Sibrel is our special guest. What a guy. If you think this has been fascinating, wait until we get Bart to talk about the astronaut that actually decked him because he wanted to get the astronaut to put his hand on the Bible and say that they actually went to the moon. None of the 3 astronauts would do that. We'll be back on the other side of this break as the X Zone continues right here on your town radio, Classic 1220, www.classic1220.ca. And welcome back to the X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell, and you're listening to the X Zone on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, www.classic1220.ca. My guest this hour is Bart Sibrel. His website is sibrel.com. That's Sibrel.com. Bart, before we went to the break, I was just doing a little bit of a teaser for the audience about the astronauts that you tried to get them to put their hand on the Bible and swear that they went to the moon. And not one would do it.
Well, there was an atheist who did it, but the people who believed in God would not do it. And basically, after we produced A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which, by the way, was financed by a multimillionaire who builds rockets for NASA, who knows that the missions are fake, okay? He gave us $1 million to expose it because he thought it was his patriotic duty. And after the film came out, 4 out of 5 people reversed their opinion after watching the 45-minute movie, which you can see for free at Sibrel.com, largely because of this footage we uncovered. I've shown it in theaters, and people just gasp when the lights come up and you see they're using a 1-foot model of the Earth that's allegedly floating in space, and it's not. And so I guess from courtroom TV shows as a kid, I thought, well, why not just track down some of these astronauts and see if they'll swear on a Bible? Right. So we tracked down about 9 of them and asked them to swear on the Bible, including Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins from the first mission, and none of them would do it. Now, Rob, if I walked on the moon and someone thought it was all done in a TV studio, I would find that hysterically funny. And if they wanted me to swear on a Bible that I really did, I'm like, sure, would 2 Bibles make you feel better? But when I went up to Buzz Aldrin, and that's the famous punch heard around the world, it was like I walked up to him in front of his wife and said, oh, your mistress says hello. You see, a sword with no point causes no injury. And he reacted because we had live TV cameras there and we were exposing him for the liar that he is. And it's too bad. You know, if one person only claimed to have walked on the moon, maybe they would have told the truth by now. But if one confesses, it's really inadvertently forcing everyone else to confess as well. And that film is called Astronauts Gone Wild. After all, one astronaut punched me, another one kicked me, one threatened to punch me, one threatened to shoot me, and it gets even better. I showed this classified footage to Edgar Mitchell in his house. He turned beet red. He said, where did you get this footage? Get out of my house. And he literally kicks me from behind as I'm picking up my equipment. He's so angry, cursing. This is a guy supposed to be some peace and love guru. And in the commotion, we left a high-quality wireless microphone on him. And in the commotion, my cameraman forgot to hit stop record. So while the camera's in the back seat of the rental car and the astronaut's house driveway, while he and his son are in their house with the doors closed, we're recording their conversations. And about 3 months after the fact, we did transcripts of all the interviews. And the film secretary calls me up frantic and says, Bart, do you know what they're talking about? When you left the microphone on them and you turned and came back and got it? I'm like, I don't know what. She says, they're talking about calling the CIA to have you assassinated. I'm like, yeah, that's funny. She says, no, Bart, they're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. I'm like, yeah, that's funny. She said, Bart, you're not listening to me. They're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. And sure enough, they are. Do you want to call the CIA and have him whacked? Now, if I'm some silly person who thinks the moon missions are fake and we're done in a TV studio, why would the CIA care? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And not only do we have an eyewitness to the filming of the moon landing, which was the chief of security at the Cannon Air Force Base, which was the headquarters of their intelligence division. He personally stood beside President Johnson, June 1st, 1968, and President Johnson gave him a list of 15 VIP visitors who were allowed to come in and observe. We published that list in my book at Sibrel.com, some of whom are still alive today, some of whom presumably are CIA agents.
I remember watching both your movies. A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon and then Astronauts Gone Wild. And wasn't it Edgar Mitchell's son who said, should I call the CIA and have him whacked?
That's right. He's
Yeah.
talking about that with his father.
Right.
First of all, why would an Apollo astronaut have the CIA in his Rolodex, right?
Exactly.
And if it's a, quote, civilian mission, and maybe he's knocked off people before and told his son about it and boasted about it. And there's a scripture, it says, when someone issues a curse that the person does not deserve, it will fall back on their head. So the young man who suggested to his Apollo astronaut father that he have me killed later died of cancer at the age of 26.
Oh, my Lord. Bart, how could something as big as the moon hoax be suppressed?
Well, it's actually one of the easiest secrets to keep a secret. The number one answer I hear why the moon missions must be real is 400,000 people were involved. But do you really think the CIA is so stupid to tell the person making the glove or the door handle or the boot, hey, we're really not going to the moon. Be sure not to tell anybody. Like I said, there's 400,000 bank tellers at Bank of America, but they are clueless about the corruption that the CIA knows. And there's no independent press coverage. Do you realize that? It's not like World War II that's going on in front of billions of people here on Earth, or even 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
It's a TV picture controlled by the Richard Nixon administration. Do you see that? We have to take their word for it. And there's no independent press coverage whatsoever. It's actually one of the easiest things to fake. Plus, people wanted to believe it. Whoever killed Kennedy, the guy's still dead. Whoever did 9/11, all those people are dead. This is different. This is a positive lie. And you taking candy away and giving someone a big plate of manure instead, and they will defend that candy, just like Glenn Beck, defending the candy, defending murderers on his show. It's pretty sad.
Tell us about your book, Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker on the CIA hit list.
Well, it took me about 15 years to write. It took me about 2 years to edit. Basically, the funny thing happened on the way to the moon. That took 7 years to produce. Astronauts Gone Wild took 3 years. All this added up to about $1 million. And people wanted to know the backstory. And there's an incredible backstory. We've talked about it on your show before in 2 parts, I think. Basically, I was giving them the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, the shadows intersect, and yeah, they can't repeat it all this, years later. But I still need concrete proof. And then as I'm editing the film, winding it up, I pop in a tape and says, do not show to the public on the screen. I'm like, oh, this should be good. So I hit fast forward, and it's the same shot for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It's a special effect shot of allegedly the Earth floating in space. The lights come up, and it's really a 1-foot model. They're faking being halfway to the moon. And there's a third track of audio of the CIA telling them to fake a 4-second radio delay to make it appear that they're farther away from Earth orbit than they really are. This is what convinced NBC News that they did not go to the moon. One news director was afraid to broadcast it for fear it would cause a civil war, that it would enrage the public. Even though 9/11 killed more people, even though the JFK assassination witness list, probably more people were knocked off. This is different. This is burned in people's hearts with pride. They got down on their knees and prayed. They waved their flag. They teared up. They held ticker tape parades. They printed it on coins. They printed on stamps. They gave them medals of honor for being such good liars. And that is our country. I'm sad to say that's the truth of it.
Now, when was the lunar mission supposed to have happened? In what year?
That was 1969. They launched on July 16th and allegedly walked on the moon on the 20th. However, it was filmed a little more than a year earlier at Cannon Air Force Base, according to eyewitness Cyrus Eugene Akers. I mean, as you're dying, you've got nothing to lose. You're not going to confess that you're a murderer,
right,
of all things, right? And then when the military police asked him why he did it, his son, who was my source, who was writing all this down, said, well, we're covering up the moon landing fraud, which was filmed at our base. They built a fake moon landing set, threatened to kill anybody who told anybody about it. In fact, less than 2 years ago, when I'm confirming all this information with his son, 2 CIA agents show up to the guy's house and threaten to kill him and his family if he ever talks to me again about his father's participation in the moon landing falsification. And this is our government. I mean, you have to understand, according to the dead man's relatives, okay, Bobby Kennedy Jr., his uncle, was killed by the CIA. Now, the Kennedy family has more access to knowledge about that event than Oliver Stone does. And if they say he was killed by the CIA, I believe him. And then Robert McNamara, as he was dying, he said the whole reason the Vietnam War started, the Pearl Harbor event that we needed, the Gulf of Tonkin, we just made it up. It never happened. Congress passed a law, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, based on something the CIA made up that led to the death of 58,220 Americans. So if they're willing to kill 58,220 of their own soldiers, willing to kill their own president, I think they're willing to fake an image of the moon on television, don't you, Rob?
I certainly do. And my question to you, Bart, is President Kennedy was supposed to, or believed to be, a very upfront person. You know, he put his brother Bobby in as Attorney General, who went after the mob and, you know, tried to shut everything down that was a no-go. Didn't Kennedy try to abolish the CIA at one time?
Absolutely. That was one of the things he was probably going to do, maybe not by the end of the year, but probably by the springtime. He says he was going to break it into so many parts and scatter it to the wind. He said there's no purpose for us having this.
All right, he
said they're an entity of their own that's lawless.
Okay, here's my question. Is it possible that part of the reason why Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd back in 1963 is that he caught wind that the moon landing was going to be hoaxed?
Well, actually, I don't know if it's in my book or not. To tell you the truth, I have to go back and look. But in 2009, I got a contact who was in the Kennedy administration in the White House, had an office in the White House, and they sent me a document about the Kennedy administration discussing the possibility of having to fake the moon landing to keep the goal. And they were talking about faking it much sooner than I thought. I don't think Kennedy would have gone along with that. I think the main reason he was killed is he was going to get rid of the CIA, therefore the CIA killed him, and he was going to abolish the Federal Reserve, which are the billionaires and so forth who would lose billions and billions of dollars, trillions, over the course of 50 years if the U.S. started printing their own money by their own authority rather than...
Bart, stand by, my friend. We've got to take our break here. Bart Sibrel's our guest. Sibrel.com is his website. This is the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast centers in St. Catharines, Ontario on, you ready for this? Hometown Radio, Classic 1220, www.classic1220.ca.
Of a traveling show, my mama used to dance for the money they'd throw. Mama would do whatever he could, preach a little gospel, sell a couple bottles of Dr. Good. Gypsies, tramps, and thieves, we'd hear it from the people.
Welcome back, everyone. Bart Sibrel is our special guest. His website is Sibrel.com, Sibrel.com. And this is the X Zone on your hometown radio, Classic 1220. Stream us. Visit our website at www.classic1220.ca. Bart, have you ever had any close calls? I mean, besides the one that we know about with the CIA or any other nefarious organization with alphabets behind their names?
Well, my book, I think, is 12 chapters, and 2 chapters are devoted to my encounters with the CIA. The first one is called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to CNN. So basically, after I found this incredible footage of them faking part of the moon mission right in front of your eyes, I just, wept. I'm like, oh my gosh, they really did fake the moon landing. How sad is that? And then I panicked. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got proof they faked the moon landing in my house with a toddler son and a blind roommate. What have I gotten myself into? And I immediately drive to CNN in the middle of the night, and then I'm surrounded in the back alley of CNN by government agents who literally abduct me. They confiscate these, high-end broadcast tapes. They're not the original, of course. And they drug me with truth serum to the point of vomiting. And I escaped their custody. I made my way back to Nashville, where I lived at the time, and I peed in a cup. I said, I got him. I got truth serum in me. I'm going to prove to NBC, that I was drugged by some exotic drug only the CIA would have. I give it to a friend to put in a lab in his name, thinking I can outwit the CIA. And after a couple of days go by, I follow up and I said, well, what were the lab results? He said, well, there was a problem at the lab. And I'm like, well, what problem? He said, well, they had a break-in over the weekend. And I'm like, yeah, so what? He said, well, funny thing, the only thing stolen was your urine sample. So somehow the spooks from the CIA tracked that down and found out about it anyway, despite me, trying to be secretive about it. That was probably, it was a multi-day adventure there. It's outlined in my book at Sibrel.com, which again, I read myself, an audiobook or Kindle or print. And it was pretty hairy there for a while. I had kind of a little bit of trouble 10 years later when I got that White House document from a source at the Kennedy administration. Had a bunch of strange things happen then. And it seems like every now and then I'll run into somebody who seems suspicious to me. And of course, when I was editing the book, my source, the son of Cyrus Eugene Akers, he literally was threatened by the CIA to kill him and his family. And this actually involved the White House. White House did an investigation. A senator on the United States Intelligence Committee did an investigation, and so did the FBI regarding my book, regarding my findings, regarding the moon landing being fake. Of course, they didn't publish any of this, but that's what happened. And this is very serious because the second to the last chapter is called NASA's Greatest Fear. And when I had a millionaire backing me, the film took 7 years because of all the research we did. And I had amazing information that I was asked not to put in the film to release at a later date. And that information is in the book, one of which is my 4-hour interview with Betty Grissom, who is the widow of Gus Grissom, who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon until he became a whistleblower at NASA. In fact, days before he was killed, he brought in reporters all the way up the elevator to the top of the rocket without permission and affixed a lemon the size of a grapefruit to the top of the rocket and had the newspapers take a picture of it. The man who's going to be the first man to walk on the moon says the equipment is a piece of junk. It's a lemon. A few days later, his widow, who I interviewed for 4 hours, said on January 26, 1967, he came home from work and said, "Hun, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today inspecting the equipment. I wonder why they're here. I've never seen him here before." Very next day, the guy's dead from, quote, faulty equipment. So she is saying, and her son is saying, who's a 747 pilot, that they have 100% forensic evidence that he was murdered by the CIA. So not only is our government taking a third of our income to deceive us about the moon landing, then they're using that money to hire CIA agents to kill our brethren who are trying to expose their crimes. And it's my understanding, Rob, that the first document of the United States wasn't the Constitution. It was the Declaration of Independence, where it was proclaimed to all the world that when any government becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Well, what's the first one? Life. They're murdering their own people. Not my conspiracy theory. That's the testimony of the dead man's wife. So this is the state of the world, and it's amazing. People who are corruption, anti-deep state still defend the moon landing. It just boggles the mind.
Bart, I still have a hard time trying to understand why the CIA is involved, because according to what I understand, they are not supposed to be operating within the United States. They're supposed to be operating outside of the United States.
Well, they killed Kennedy in Dallas, so there's some proof right there. And of course, they violate the law all the time. They're not supposed to assassinate leaders. And they boast in the Wall Street Journal, we killed this, democratically elected president of this country. We killed the democratically elected president of this country. They boast about it. They boast about breaking the law. Congress passed a law in 1998 to audit the Pentagon. 20 years go by without an audit. They just ignore the law, and no one calls them on it. William Benny worked for the NSA, the CIA's offshoot, for 30 years. He said on national TV a few years ago, the CIA monitors the private cell phone conversations of Supreme Court justices in order to get dirt on them, to blackmail them to vote the way the intelligence agencies tell them to vote. That's an established fact. No one contradicted it. Not a single investigation by the FBI or Justice Department that Supreme Court justices are being blackmailed. How can that be? But that's the way that it is.
So what do you think is going to happen now that the missions are being planned to go back to the moon?
Well, they can't go, and they're going to keep postponing it until an asteroid strike or economic collapse or another illness circling the globe, and which point no one will care who shot JFK or if the moon landings are real or not.
That's scary, Bart.
Yeah, it's the world that we live in. Jesus said that things will get so bad in the last days that unless God intervenes, no one will survive. I take that to mean that the evil people are going to win. I mean, they killed Kennedy in broad daylight. They knocked off 200 eyewitnesses. They got away with the Gulf of Tonkin. They got away with the moon landing. They got away with 9/11. They got away with this little thing for the last 3 years. They're just more and more entrenched and more powerful and more experts at what they want to achieve through evil means. The problem for them is, what good is it to gain the world and forfeit your soul? So that they'll have the world as it's crumbling away, but they won't make it to the other side, and I feel sorry for them.
Bart, do you think that the movie Capricorn 1 was produced to give the Americans the idea that the moon landing could have been faked?
Absolutely. People in Hollywood like me, we saw the lighting is electrical lighting. The average person can't see that. We said, look, this is done in a TV studio. This is not sunlight. So there was a book called We Never Went to the Moon by Bill Casey, my original source at NASA. And they basically parodied a fake Mars landing because they didn't want to say fake moon landing. That would be too offensive. So, and it had all the top people in the 70s. I mean, the top billed people. It had Elliot Gould, Brenda Vaccaro, Hal Holbrook, Sam Waterston, James Brolin, Karen Black. It had Telly Savalas. It had just star after star, and it's a great movie.
Yeah, O.J. Simpson as well, yeah. No, I was saying that the movie also had O.J. Simpson, and of course, if the spacesuit doesn't fit, you can't convict. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what that means. It seems like the guy was a different person back then. There's a saying in conversion that someone is born again.
True.
And apparently, people can be unborn. Because when I look at O.J. Simpson's face and demeanor and prior, 1978 or prior, he has complete innocence about him.
Yes.
And yet something happened. He was transformed the opposite direction, apparently, and it didn't work out too good for him.
No, he should have stayed making the Naked Gun movies.
Those are good, aren't they?
Listen, quickly, we've got to take a break in about 3 minutes. What was your opinion on the congressional hearings into UAPs and UFOs?
Well, I think that's ridiculous. I think they're planning on doing an alien deception. Von Braun, the guy in charge of faking the moon mission, his closest friend before he died, she said he told her multiple times that the federal government is going to fake an alien invasion. In 54 years, only one source has come out saying the moon landings are fake, as he was dying and his son was threatened with death for being associated with him. Why are all these military people coming forward and, quote, leaking information unless it's contrived? Because if it were really a secret, we wouldn't know anything about it. And so, except my maybe a deathbed confession, and only one in 50 years. So they want us to believe in aliens, which is, I believe, proof that it's not true. If you go to Sibrel.com, I've written an extensive article about, are there aliens, are they real or not? And you'd be surprised of the findings.
Exonation, Bart Sibrel is our special guest of this hour. His website is Sibrel.com, Sibrel.com. Do you believe that there are ETs out there, that they're coming here?
Well, they've pointed radio telescopes for 50 years in every direction of the universe, and they haven't found one radio signal. You see, normally the truth is the exact opposite of what the corrupt government wants us to believe. They want us to believe aliens are everywhere. What if we're it? The latest scientist says we're it. If there were intelligent life elsewhere, then we would pick up radio signals, and the only radio signals in the whole universe are coming from Earth. But at the same time, UFOs are real. So what does that mean? The top two UFO researchers, one Frenchman, one American, after 40 years of research, came to the same conclusion. UFOs are real, but they're not from outer space. They're from Earth. And thirdly, they're demonic.
Demonic.
That's right.
Let's talk
Meaning that aliens are potentially fallen angels.
Well, let's talk about this when we come back from this final break, Bart, because I had a guest on a couple of nights ago who said the exact same thing. Another guest I had on, maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, said that with the advent of AI, that the government was in fact going to simulate an alien attack. Wow. All this is starting to come together. Bart Sibrel is our guest. Sibrel is the website. And we'll be back on the other side of this break as we finalize this edition of the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And you're listening to the X Zone on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, www.classic1220.ca.
Preach a little gospel, sell a couple bottles of Dr. Good. Gypsies, tramps, and thieves, we'd hear it from the people of the town. They'd call us gypsies, tramps, and thieves, but every night all the men would come around. Hey lady, you lady, cursing at your life. You're a discontented mother and a regimented wife. I've no doubt you dream about the things you'll never do, but I wish someone had to talk to me like I wanna talk to you. Ooh, I've been to Georgia and California and anywhere I could run. Took the hand of a preacher man.
X Zone Radio, Bart Sibrel is my special guest, Sibrel.com. And he's the author of Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker on the CIA hit list. And you're listening to us on the, let me see here. My gosh, I went blank there for a sec. Hometown Radio, Classic 1220. And you can listen to us streaming around the world. Visit our great website. Find out what other shows are available on the station. Great morning show with Steph and Danny Z. Then you've got a drive home show with Pete Dichter. There's some sports shows. My good buddy Chuck LaFleur is the news director. And all this and more at www.classic1220.ca. Before we went to the break, we were talking about angels, fallen angels. And it seems that a lot of the religious philosophies are pointing at these days as the final days. How does this correlate with what you believe and what you see, Bart?
Well, originally, like I mentioned before, I turned down the project of making the film about the moon landings being fake because it seemed like they could have been faked, and if I looked into it, it might be dangerous. So I turned it down. And over the next several years, I read the Bible 5 times from cover to cover. I wasn't a Christian, but it did develop in me an understanding that there is good versus evil. There is truth versus lies. And it makes sense that there's a judgment for how we live this life. And I realized that if they faked the moon landing, that is actually more profound historically than if they had actually gone. Do you realize that? The faking of the moon landing by the alleged greatest nation on earth, the most honorable, the savior of the world, the spreader of truth and democracy, freedom of speech, blah, blah, blah. They faked the moon landing. That's the nation that did it. That is so much more profound than if they had actually gone. And when I realized that was true, I said, this is worth dying for. It's an important truth for mankind to know. And I have a lot of Jewish friends, and even though I'm a Christian, or try to be, most of my Jewish friends are more Christian than my Christian friends are a lot of the time. They're very righteous people, very down to earth, and their rabbis, their prophets say that the Messiah is coming soon. And of course, our book says the Messiah is coming soon. They think it's the first time, we think it's the second time, but it's still at the same time, which is, to me, highly significant. I think we are living in the last days. If you go to Sibrel.com, scroll down about halfway, you'll see this very detailed article I wrote about aliens, and it has a link in there for von Braun's secretary saying he warned her multiple times that there's going to be a fake alien invasion. And it appears to me that these are actually fallen angels. There are some controversial parts in Genesis 6 where it says that the sons of God, Elohim, intermarried with the daughters of men, and it produced giants. The offspring were giants. Now, in Jesus' day, that's what they believed. But around 1850, they changed that theology to mean something else. I think it means what it says. The oldest book in the Bible is actually Job. The term angels, which was when it says the angels presented them before God, it's the same word used there in Genesis. So that's what it means. And so people say, well, Jesus said we won't get married in heaven, we'll be like the angels. But then, of course, getting married and having sex are two different things, because you can have sex without being married, and you can be married and not have sex. So they're kind of jumping to a conclusion there because it sounds a little bit odd. But if you look at Genesis 3:15, it says that there will be war between two bloodlines, the bloodline of Adam and the bloodline of fallen angels, Lucifer. And I don't think it's a coincidence that all but one of the United States presidents come from the same bloodline. I think they're protecting that bloodline. I think the reason why alien abductions often harvest people's sperm and eggs is because the fallen angel offspring are sterile. It says in Leviticus 19:19, do not crossbreed species. And when you do, against God's command, when you take a horse and a donkey to get a mule, the mule is sterile. And I think they have to reharvest human eggs and sperm in order to repopulate themselves. And that's why God said, be fruitful and multiply, and the people who run the world say, depopulate the earth by 94%, you see? So I think this is what's going on. As odd as it may seem, as bizarre as it may seem, that's likely what's going on. And of course, Satan, he's a liar, and all of his angels are liars. How can you prove or disprove if an alien pops down and a spacecraft, or what appears to be a spacecraft, it says they're from hundreds of light years away? How can you prove or disprove it? If they've been around for thousands of years, then they have thousands of years of technology. Maybe it can fly in the air and under the water and who knows what, but they're not going to tell the truth. They're liars. In fact, people in the military who have said they've met aliens say they're liars. They're pathological liars. And so I think maybe this is one of the ways they're going to usher in a one world government. Again, just go to Sibrel.com, scroll down about halfway, and you can see this article that I spent hundreds of hours of writing and researching, and has multiple clips in it as well that seem to indicate that we're it. In fact, there's a TV show called Ancient Aliens.
Right.
And I thought it was a one-time show. Apparently, it was a series for many years. And they basically had to admit, because of this DNA study about 20 years ago called the Eve Project, where they took DNA from all nationalities and traced it backwards in time and said all humans scientifically came from one woman, just like the Bible says. So people who want to deny God say, well, how can we deal with that? Because that's exactly, how can a person just appear and have no lineage before them, just like the Bible? So they said, okay, we can't say that's not true because it's right here in the DNA. Okay, here's a good one. Why don't we say we were put here by aliens? Now, in 3.5 years, they never ask a question that I would ask as a third grader. Well, if we were made by aliens, then who made the aliens? And they forget in the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, I think, it says Lucifer wanted to ascend to the throne of God and be God. So if they're saying, the world is saying, the latest scientific, theology is saying we were made by aliens, and if aliens are really fallen angels, which are led by Lucifer, then what they're really saying, Rob, is we're made by Lucifer and not God. You see, Lucifer taking, credit for making mankind. And that's what the latest intellectuals believe. Can you believe that?
Not really.
Stephen Greer is either an agent or completely deceived, because his number one source that aliens are real are the Apollo astronauts. The guy says the moon landings are fake. I mean, we're real when they're clearly fake. And his number one proof that aliens and UFOs must be real is the Apollo astronauts say so. Well, Edgar Mitchell goes on, TV show after TV show saying UFOs are real and the moon landing is real. So I guess they're just about as real as the moon landing.
Something that I can't understand, Bart, and when you alluded to the advancement of technology of the Luciferians, why do they need to keep on abducting people if they're this smart? Would they have not decoded the DNA, put it in a bank somewhere, and then recreated it as needed?
Well, maybe so. Maybe that's what they're doing, because all the alien abduction stories I heard are from the 80s, and I haven't heard any since then. So, yeah, maybe they are getting more advanced. I don't know. But if you go to, do a Google search for World Economic Forum logo, this is a multi-billion-dollar organization that admits to picking the leaders of the world, openly says we choose the leaders of the world. And they can spend $1 billion on their logo if they want to. And they have world on one line, has an O in it. Economic on another line, a little off-center, has an O in it. And forum has an O in it. And a little half circle going through all three O's, forming 666, hidden in plain sight. Apparently, these people literally worship Lucifer. And that's not the only logo that has 666 in it. Google does. And many other have 3 6s in them. It's just bizarre. You would think that would be the most outrageous thing, but the most outrageous things ends up being true, like the moon landings were indeed fake, and apparently the world leaders, some of them, actually worship the devil.
I had a guest on many years ago. His name is Pastor Harry Walther. And he was saying to us during the show, he said, "Do you know, Rob, 666 is not the mark of the devil." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "It's WWW."
No, I'm not sure about that one. But in any case, who knows what it is? The interesting thing about Revelation 13 is it says in the last days, everyone, rich and poor, slave and free, would be forced to buy and sell with 666 on it. Pick up a barcode of a can of soup or box of cereal. There's a first line, a middle line, and a last line that are longer without a number. They're the same line, and if you see a 6 somewhere in the code, you can look above it and to the left, and that's the thickness of the 6. Every barcode, believe it or not, starts with a 6, has a 6 in the middle, and ends with a 6. It's not deny it does. They just say it's a coincidence. So forced to do something is different than voluntarily do it. Like if I push your shoulders down to kneel, that's not you willingly kneeling, is it?
No,
so
it's
if
not.
you're forced, you can't buy anything, even a Bible, without a barcode. So that's not our fault. So I don't think we're going to be judged on that. But this is a prophecy right there. Everyone is being forced to buy and sell with 666 on it. It's remarkable. It's right there in the Bible, and it's right there in every barcode of everything in the store.
Bart, we've got 1 minute left. What is the message that you would like to leave with the X-Zone Nation tonight?
I don't know. I mean, I used to think the moon missions were real with all of my heart, but the truth is so important. I watched Men in Black 3 for like the 5th time last night, and it says the bitterest truth is better than the sweetest lie. If you really have an open mind, go to Sibrel.com, S as in Sam, I-B as in boy, R-E-L, Sibrel.com. Get the book in audio, print, or Kindle, and there's 16 video links, and you will have the revelation, the epiphany, just like I did. They really did fake the moon landing. It's worse than we thought. All of that is at Sibrel.com.
You know, that opens up a can of worms, Bart. If they faked the moon landing, what else has been faked?
I don't know. I think you're in the next room. I don't really think you're in Canada.
Well, yeah, it's your turn to make the coffee after the show. Bart Sibrel, I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight. Always a great pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to the next time you join us back here in the X-Zone. Stay safe, my friend.
You too, Rob.
Good night, Bart. That's it for tonight, X-Zone Nation. I'll be back tomorrow night as once again we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X-Zone, a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And, wow, as you heard tonight, a lot of eyes are open thanks to Bart Sibrel. Visit his website, Sibrel.com. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone, and you've been listening to us on Classic 1220 here in St. Catharines. Online at www.classic1220.ca. So until tomorrow night, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night, everyone.